Welcome to another Bible study walkthrough where you're going to learn to read and study the Bible. Hopefully you'll develop some tips or some skills rather and learn some tips and techniques along the way after this. If you didn't already know, we have a completely free Bible study program linked in the description below. We're in Hebrews chapter 2. We officially, in the last Bible study walkthrough, ended in verse somewhere in the 3. So I'm just going to at least read verse 3, and we want to read it in context. That's the very first tip I always tell you guys. Read in context, read in context. So if you just start in verse 3, you ain't going to get the context. So let's back it up to verse 1 at least. It says, "Therefore we must pay much closer attention to what we've heard, lest we drift away from it." Right? So the audience there has the opportunity or the temptation to drift away from a message they've heard instead of paying close attention to it. For, or because, remember, we said that when you see the word for, it acts as a kind of reasoning, a because, since the message declared by angels proved to be reliable, and every transgression or disobedience received a just retribution, how shall we escape, right, if we neglect such a great salvation? It was declared at first by the Lord. It was attested to us by those who heard, while God also bore witness by signs and wonders and various miracles and by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. If you noticed, there was quite a few times the word "and" was used. Now, this is just me recognizing something that to note in the text. When I see a repeating word, I want to go, hey, there's a lot of "ands" used. Maybe it's a big deal, maybe it's not. But it's at least given us a real long sentence. And because of that, we can do this, okay? The context here is that the author of Hebrews is what? He's trying to convince the audience to pay close attention to what they've heard so they don't just drift away from it, right? So verse 2 is going to be used to reference a message in the past that was proved to be reliable and there was consequences for disobeying it. And then he goes, since that happened with that message in that time, how shall we escape, right? In our time, if we neglect such a great salvation, which is this message that the audience has heard. And then he's going to go on to talk about the seriousness of this message. It's a great salvation. It was declared by the Lord. That means it's divinely authoritative. The source of this message is divine. It's a big deal. It was attested or proven to us by those who heard, while God also bore witness. So this is God validating this message by signs and wonders and various miracles, and even by gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to his will. So what I see here, when I notice the word "and" is used a lot, and so I'm just going to circle that for you because it'll be helpful to kind of connect these. That means there's a lot of things he's stringing together in a sort of list, right? So there's a list developing as a Bible student. What I want to do is recognize that list developing. And the list here is actually characteristics of this message. The message was declared. The message was attested, right? The message was borne witness to. But look at all the different ways God will bear witness. There almost becomes a secondary list within the main list. So what I'm going to do is take my handy-dandy orange highlighter, and I'm going to highlight anything that falls into this list of ways that God bore witness. Well, he uses signs. He uses wonders. He uses various miracles, not just one kind. He actually, by gifts of the Holy Spirit, distributed according to his will, right? So because I notice this is a list, and I've kind of already cheated and gotten ahead of the whole thing, I'm going to back it up, and I'm going to pretend like I didn't say a few things. So I'm going to go, you know what? I see a list of certain things. There's signs, there's wonders, there's miracles, gifts of the Holy Spirit. When you recognize a list as you read the Bible, you should ask yourself, what do the items in this list have in common? What do they have different? Like what are some differences between them? But more than that, I want to find some common ground. And the way I might figure out the common ground between these is by reading it in context. And I'll know it was declared at first by the Lord, this message of salvation. It was attested to us by those who heard. And now we have God bearing witness to this salvation message by signs, wonders, miracles, gifts. So when you read it in that fluid way as a list, you'll find out that the main way these things relate to each other is that they are all different ways in which God bears witness to this message of salvation, right? Another thing I might do is go, why does the gifts of the Holy Spirit distributed according to the will of God, why do the gifts find a place in this, God validating the message? In other words, how is it that gifts play a role in God proving this message is true? These are questions that I ask when I read the Bible, and you should too. When you study and I see a list, ask questions about that. You go, why gifts? Have I seen anything up to this point in the book of Hebrews referencing gifts of the Spirit, referencing spiritual gifts that are distributed according to the will of God, right? But notice, he could have just ended, and this is just how I read, he could have ended by gifts of the Holy Spirit and then boom, put a period. But he doesn't. What he does is he continues to explain what these gifts are. They are gifts of the Spirit, but they're distributed according to his will. Now that seems like an unnecessary extra few details that don't relate at all. Like, why note the fact that these gifts are distributed, by God's Spirit and according to his will? Why those two things? These are questions I ask. What might these two ideas, how might they relate to or connect to the previous verses in this chapter, right? This idea of God distributing according to his will, or God giving gifts by the Spirit, and how that bears witness. These are just questions that I ask, and something you guys can do is in the comments, let me know your thoughts. What do you think? Why do you think he adds this extra detail and way of understanding the gifts? It's not unnecessary, right? It's not unintentional or accidental. He's doing something, and it's on us to meditate on what the author is doing and why he adds that detail. Okay? So then what I do is I'm going to connect this verse 3 and 4 to what's been said before. Read it in context. The context is that this message is serious. Don't drift away from it, because we've seen something similar happen in the past, right? And then the verse 3 and 4 adds to why this message is serious. The Lord himself declares it. There's witness. God's bearing witness to it. This is a very serious message, right? And so when you plug things in context, you can understand them correctly. That's how you read the Bible, which a lot of people, unfortunately, don't read in context. They'll eisegete verses and take them out of their context. So we get to verse 5, okay? And then some secondary questions you might ask is, what does this word declared mean, or this word attested? Maybe I'll go look it up in a Greek lexicon and look at what the words mean in different contexts, and that might also help. That's something I might do. If there's a word that really stands out to you, or you've seen that word repeated, like the word salvation. I've seen that at least twice in the last 4 verses, right? So I want to pay attention to that. Maybe I'd go to a Greek lexicon and look up the definition of this word in context, or what it means to declare or attest to something. So it says, 4. It was not to angels that God subjected the world to come. So immediately what I see, and I'm going to pause and do this for you, is I see another repeating word, the word angels, right? And you go, I don't see that word. Well, if you go back to verse 2, he's talked about angels declaring a message in the past. If you go back up to the end of chapter 1, angels are ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation. So the author, as he transitions into this new line of thought, the message, right? He's not leaving angels behind entirely and that topic. What he's doing is he's connecting the idea of this beautiful message to angels. Somehow they play a role in that. And he's going to continue to mention angels along the way as he continues to unpack the seriousness of this message, right? So I've seen the word angels, 3 times just in the past 5-6 verses. That's a big deal. The whole chapter of Hebrews 1 is all about Jesus essentially mostly being better than angels. Not mostly being better, but most of the chapter is dedicated to Jesus being better than angels. So it's on me to recognize that and go, hey, I see a repeating idea. So now I'm going to be looking for that as I keep reading. I'm going to pay attention to anywhere that angels might be referenced. Now remember, the word for acts as a because, right? So what I want to do is go back and get the main point, right? He says, pay close attention to what we've heard. That's the main command. That's the command. And then he'll go on to explain that command. Don't neglect the salvation that you have. It was this, it was that, it was that. But the main point in the first 4 verses is don't neglect such a great salvation. Pay close attention to what you've heard, right? So that's the main point. The main point, I'm going to write it down so you can see how I read the Bible. The main point is pay attention, okay, to this message of salvation. 4, right? Since that's the main point, it transitions like this. Hey, pay close attention to the message of salvation. For, or because, it was not to angels God subjected the world to come. And you go, that seems to have no connection to any of the previous ideas put forth. What in the world does this new idea have anything to do with the rest of the chapter and the rest of the letter? It seems like he's starting a brand new idea. And as a reader, you should pay attention to that. Right? He's mainly talking about not drifting away. Then all of a sudden, he starts this new line of thought, and he goes, "Hey, like a senile grandpa that just kind of lost his train of thought, and he just starts talking about something completely unrelated." That's what it seems like. He goes, "Hey, let me tell you something. God didn't subject the world to angels, the world to come, right? Of which we are speaking." Okay, so there's a world to come that God did not subject to angels that he's talking about, right? And so you go, what do you mean we're the world to come that we're talking about? When did you mention anything about that? This is what we do as Bible students. It's okay to question and try and make sense of things, because initially I go, I've seen nothing. You say you're talking about a world to come. I've seen nothing about that. Well, pause. It's on us to follow the author's line of thought and go, look, if he said he's been talking about that, then I should read backwards and find where he mentions a world to come. Right? So I'll look in chapter 1. Is there any mention of a world to come? Is there any mention of like a new creation or anything like that? Well, actually, there is. Ding, 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 ding. It's right there in chapter 1, verse 11. He talks about how Jesus laid the foundation of the earth. The heavens are the work of his hands. They're going to perish. They are going to wear out like a garment, right? Like a robe, Jesus will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed, right? In other words, there is a world to come, new heavens and a new earth that Jesus will change and adapt the world presently into. He's going to change it. In other words, that's the world the author is referencing down here in chapter 2, verse 5. So when you read the Bible, don't just skip over things like that and go, it's kind of weird. Let me just move on. If you move on, you'll miss the gold. Because if I go back and I go, he's referenced that, well, I can take that idea of the heavens and the earth being changed and then insert that into here because he wants to connect those ideas for us. That the world that's coming, the new heavens and the new earth, are not subject to angels, right? So think about this as we end this video. In the comments, let me know the second thing. What do you think the connection is between the world to come not being subjected to angels and the idea of us not neglecting a great salvation? Okay? I'll give you a hint. The salvation relates to the world that is to come somehow, right? So it's on us to think through that and how they relate, because the biblical authors aren't just throwing random thoughts out there hoping they stick. They're very intentional. They're led by the Spirit. They're reasonable. There's logic. There's structure. These thoughts flow so so well together, and it's on us to see how they do. And when you see it, everything can change. All right, so that's today's Bible study walkthrough. Again, we have a completely free Bible study program linked in the description below. A 40-day, a 27-day, an 11-day. Thousands of people are taking it, so come join them and go deep into the scriptures and take it at your own pace, all right? And I'll see you guys later.